Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you for tuning into one of our talks today. Today, we're so lucky to be joined by writer and director Wyatt Rockefeller to talk all about his movie IFC Films Settlers. And I wanted to start by talking about some of the constraints and intimacies of your film because I thought it was interesting to hear you talk about how you set yourself up to write a really intimate story in a singular location with just a few characters. And then at the same time, in doing so, you actually created a film with a really broad sense of what this world is and had to construct the entire universe of what this movie was going to be. So it actually became a much broader concept. And so once you did that, what did you find were some of the constraints that were in place in terms of figuring out how you were going to film it, how you were going to tell this story, all the while retaining the intimacy that you had initially set out to have as a central part of the film?
Well, it's a good question, and also thanks for having me on. I love that question because we really can just jump in. That's in some ways you hit the nail on the head. There were definitely moments on set where, and we shot this in Vuelsdrift, South Africa, which is really remote and comes with all sorts of environmental challenges like extreme heat and sandstorms uh, and but there were these moments on set where I'm just like, what did I do? What am I doing? Why did I sat down to write, as you say, a contained, basically one location chamber piece with just a few actors, something that I could credibly direct at this point in my career. It's my first feature. And I had to go set it on Mars and just create this very high bar that, just to get in the door, that people, before they will even start paying attention to the story, they have to accept the world and the reality of this world. And so that was a challenge. And there were definitely moments where I was just, why did I do that? But it was also that was also the fun of it too. And it was actually only when I had the idea to set this on Mars, because I'd come up with the plot previously, and it was only when I had the idea to set it on Mars, a partially terraformed Mars. So Mars is maybe one day when we're in the process of making it habitable, that I thought, oh, this could be a feature, and this really is worth, an hour and a half of people's time, a few years of mine. And that's really because it unlocked all these visual and thematic opportunities that really weren't there when it was just more of a plot.
Yeah. And structurally with the film, you have protagonist elements within characters, but at the same time, it also feels like the central protagonist to the film is actually the environment and the setting, because that's what causes the characters to have to step into certain behaviors and consider choices that they wouldn't have ever considered for themselves before. And so, how did that inform the way that you were writing a lot of the script structurally, with the element and the surrounding and the environment actually being such a central part of what these characters are battling against?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think you've really honed in on what I find most interesting about this film. It is about people having to look themselves in the mirror and just consider how far are they actually willing to go. What are they willing to do or not do to protect those they care about and survive? And that's the interesting part for me. I want people to walk out of this and wonder, what would I have done in that situation? And as a result, in the writing stage, the whole epic sweep of human history leading up to this future point would change based on very little things that were happening within the house and the dynamics between the characters, because that was my starting point. That was always what I was most interested in. And I do think, I mean, a lot of people have said this could be said anywhere, and I think there's some truth to that. It initially was, but I think again, it was only when the world came into view, when this other world became a possibility, that I thought, oh yeah, this is actually crucial to this story, because the villain in this movie is their isolation. And the fact that they can't leave is what forces them, as you say, to consider these impossible choices, these choices that they wouldn't otherwise consider. And I guess, yes, the isolation, you can find isolation in a lot of places, but it having just I there was this uniqueness to this place that I thought, okay, this is going to elevate this and also bring in these thematic elements, like the fact that they are effectively refugees from Earth, which just add all these extra layers to the story.
And within the fact that it is such an intimate character portrayal, how did that then fall into the process and the way that you were working with the cast in particular? Because, you know, you've got a myriad of cast, and something that Brooklyn Prince is going to need from you is something very different than like Nell Tiger Free playing Remy later in the series. So did you find that actually the intimacy and only having a few actors allowed you to really tailor your directing style to each of them in terms of figuring out what exactly it was that they needed from you as a director?
Absolutely, and they all did have very different styles of working. For instance, Ismail, he likes to do a few takes in a row without cutting. He gives you options, and that was the first time I'd worked with someone like that, and it was really fun and learned a lot from him. Uh, Similarly, Sophia, I actually think she very much has the mind of a director. I think she should direct, because she's incredibly exacting about things, and this may come from her days as a dancer, where boy, can she hit her marks, and and she just is so she can recreate these very complex movements, but also these very complex emotions, uh, again and again, and it does feel like there is such a thought process that goes into it, but that then allows her to actually just be in the moment and act, and it to feel and to be real. Same with Johnny, a good example. He's such a veteran, he's such a pro at this. I learned a lot from him. He's also directed himself, and he just psyching himself up. There's these little things that he would do, like in more intense scenes that he's in, he would scream right before we would we would go, and which was kind of scary. But then Brooklyn, who is already such a established and talented actor in her own right, started copying him. So she would start screaming before it takes, which was kind of adorable, frankly, and a lot less scary than when Johnny did it. And actually, she and Nell, like both of them, Nell plays the older version of her. They really do have this. They are not acting. They really get themselves in a place where they believe what they are experiencing, which is tough. I just like, oh my god, I just keep making this 9-year-old girl cry. But she's so good at it, and it was helpful that her dad was on set and her mom, every night was on Skype. Her mom's an acting coach and was helping her with her lines, and that they really knew, what she could do, and keeping her safe though, uh, but helping her get into these incredibly difficult places emotionally and mentally. And Nell had to go to similar places and did. And it's hard to put into words what kind of a gift that is that they give you. Actors are an amazing breed. I
They
don't know how they
really
do it.
They really are. And I actually wanted to talk specifically about how you worked with Nell, because she is playing, as you said, the older version of Brooklyn's character later in the film. And there's obviously a jump of several years between the two of them. And so I was interested in how you worked with Nell in terms of looking at the younger version of her character and what the experiences would have been that would lead her emotionally to the space where she's at. Because when we meet her later on, she's reached a point where she's so kind of emotionally broken down that she can't even communicate anymore. And it's very clear that she hasn't communicated for a long time because she's just holding on a lot of resentment and anger. So wanted to ask about how you and Nell really developed that space and found that emotional headspace for her as a character.
Well, first of all, with regard to how she took over from what Brooklyn did, and translated Brooklyn's character, to 10 years older, that in some ways just fell into place. That I think they both understood right away that there's this inherent strength to Remy, that she is a determined, headstrong girl. And they also had some overlap in their dates, so they were able to get to know each other, and all the actors were living together, and so really got to know each other, which was I think also very helpful. uh and they also have these actually, just this was luck, but have these very, similar quirks, which just helped. um and But like Brooklyn, as I say, Nell was really, she is able to put herself in, into the shoes of her character. And there was actually a moment where we changed the script based on an experience that she had shooting a previous scene where uh, basically her character has to make a choice, and in the script, this choice is kind of made for her, and that felt kind of weak. So I put it to her, what would you do? Uh, and she thought about shooting her experience shooting this previous scene, which we had shot the night before, which was harrowing. And she really, again, she went there and really experienced what her character experienced. And she thought about that, and she said, yeah, I would get, based on what I went through, I I would do X. And I'm sorry, I'm being so cagey about it, but when you see the movie, I think you'll probably understand. And I just, for me, that was such a, I'm very proud of that. That's a great example, I think, of really trying to hew as much as possible to a lived experience of your characters, right? And actually using that as your guide to for the decisions that they make, rather than just speculating about what would you do in that situation. That was really helpful for me. I, as a guy writing about female protagonists, trying to put myself in the headspace of that. It's also very helpful drawing on friends, female friends, and also my wife, Julie Fabrizio, who's one of the producers on this. When I was writing, getting their perspective on things. There's also, I'll say this, like there's a scene where, um, you know, Jerry basically makes a move, makes a move on her, uh, and uh, a friend of mine who's also a filmmaker, she's like, I've been in that scene. I've been in that room where it's like, oh, I thought this was a business meeting, and then this suddenly has turned into something else, and that's not something I've experienced. And it was, to be able to learn through that process, and really try to experience the world, or see the world through someone else's eyes, is, I think that's what we're trying to do. That's the value of storytelling in a way.
Yeah. And to the point where you were talking about a couple of the scenes later in the movie that, do feel a little bit harrowing. At the same time, watching the movie, the experience isn't that it's bleak. It doesn't feel suffocating. It doesn't feel heavy, because you kind of managed to dance between these different tones throughout the film. And was that something that you were thinking about as you were writing it that was important to you? Or was that something that just really naturally flowed into the way that you were constructing the story?
I don't know if it's wholly unconscious. As much as possible, I try to let the story tell itself, and not try to shoehorn things in that don't fit, that try to follow it organically. And I think one of the reasons I chose to write this story was that when I first had the idea, it all unfolded quite quickly, and it really did tell itself. But I do think, there are moments of levity, like Steve the robot definitely provides some of that. Although that's not like, wasn't just like, oh, I need to write in some kind of comic relief here. Like, he is actually integral to the plot, and his relationship is integral to Remy, and he has his own arc. But I think you do look for those moments, because it's not so much like, oh, we need something to be light, but like, those are those lighter moments, or more comedic moments, are often when people are being just more honest, and they're just being themselves, and it's an opportunity to get to know the characters in a way that is, I think, moves beyond just like how they function within a plot.
And I love that you were just bringing up Steve, the robot character in the film, because exactly as you said, he's not there purely as a prop or just for those moments of levity, but it really is a fully fledged character in the film, and it has such a relationship with Remy as well. And I know that the journey of making him was a mix of practical and visual effects in those two different stages. And so, what was the journey of Steve and the functionality of how that robot was going to move and exist and have that relationship dynamic with Remy in the film in terms of how it came together when you were writing and imagining what he might look like to then thinking about and working with your team to figure out the practicality of what you could actually build on set and then what effects you could add?
Yeah, well, I love talking about Steve because that was such a fun process. When I first wrote Steve into the script, and this was at a point when the film was much smaller, was before any of the actors had attached, and so we were thinking smaller and what we could feasibly do. I thought, okay, we can get away with kind of like a guy with a remote control car, a big remote control car, kind of like battle bots from the 2000s on Comedy Central. I don't know if you ever saw that, but that's that's the area that I was thinking in. And then the film did grow in scale, and we were able to dream a little bit bigger, and we had a VFX budget, though a limited one, so we had to be very precise about where we deployed it. And Steve is a mix of VFX and puppet. And I really wanted it to be as practical as possible, not just because I like that, but also it's because the actors have something they can actually act off of and really get to know. Uh, and that was just such a rewarding and fun process, working with the VFX artists, the puppeteer, the puppet builders, to not only design the thing and make sure that we would be able to execute consistently across the departments, but then also bring him to life and give him a personality that would be consistent from shot to shot between VFX and puppet. And that was actually, if you go to talkhouse.com, I have outlined the whole thing in much more detail than I can go into here if you're interested. Excuse me. But really the biggest challenge was movement. That's where we spent the most amount of time because it was important that he couldn't talk, that he had to be quite limited in what he could say, again because of the question of the Steve's arc is really about, is he capable of human compassion, or is he just a tool, as Jerry said? And that is answered definitively in the film. And so, but it was important that he be relatively inscrutable, that we not be able to fully understand what is going through his head. So it was important to me that he couldn't talk, and that he couldn't even vocalize, no boops and beeps like R2D2 even. So it really, all that personality then had to come through his movements. And from the beginning, I wanted the design to follow the function. And so we really had to nail down what he did, like what his purpose was within the homestead. And then that really dictated the whole design. Originally thinking of him as a Mars rover, he was on wheels, and then because the idea is that he's basically this fracking tool that's part of the terraforming process, that he breaks up the ground, seeds it, and ultimately tends to the plant life that emerges, he would need to walk on tender soil, and therefore better that he be on legs than wheels, for
And
example.
And then jumping back a little bit to talk a little bit more about some of the intimate aspects of the film, in terms of the scenes that you had to film, I think at most you have four characters on screen at any point throughout the film, but there's also a lot of moments where there's a lot of two-handers, and there's also scenes where there's just one singular character on screen. So particularly when you're looking at those much smaller moments in the film in terms of how many people we're exploring and how many characters we're looking at, how did you approach filming those scenes specifically?
Just the one-on-ones.
Yeah.
The I mean, in some ways, those were the opportunities to. We had more time to actually rehearse those scenes, which was really helpful. And trying to think. It's a good question. It's not one I've gotten, so I'm just thinking this through. Uh, each one was each one-on-one scene was actually shot in a very different way. Like, and that was partly because a lot of scenes are at the dinner table, and so we didn't want any scene to look look like the other again, and so with each successive one, we sort of got a little crazier. I mean, though it's still fitting within what what the scene demands, and I very much believe there's a right place to put a camera and not. But working with the actors, I think, especially when you can just focus in with two people, you really can have a dialogue just between the three of you and really figure out what are the emotional beats of the scene, what is this really about, and really listen to the actors. Again, I cited that example with Nell, how we changed the script based on the experience that she had, and actually that scene that had been the basis for her changing, for changing the script, which is a very complicated scene. It's effectively like a sex scene, but worse. Ismail made a very good point going in. He's like, this could be a bunch of screaming and kicking, and we really need to map this out to make sure that we all are on the same page, and this isn't just a mess. And we really could think through without actually rehearsing it, because that's a hard scene to rehearse. You really want to save that for the moment, but that really mapping out where their heads at each given moment. And I think for scenes like that, getting a little off topic here, but like when you are working in sex scenes, you're doing kind of the opposite of what you would do in almost any other scene, which is be really prescriptive about what is happening, what the actors are doing, and thinking at every moment, and where their hands are and everything else. It's really choreographed, and that's actually so that they can actually feel comfortable to focus on their performance rather than everything else in such a vulnerable setting.
And then lastly, I wanted to talk about just kind of navigating and finding your rhythm as a director on the shoot, because you have mentioned that the first day was a little bit dialing in, figuring out a lot of the rhythms and a lot of the beats and how everything was going to flow and work on set with everybody amongst the cast and the crew. And so once you kind of stepped away after that first day, were there spaces where you found yourself wanting to recalibrate anything, or how did you really figure out moving forward after day one exactly what you wanted the flow and the rhythm to be on the set and the way that you wanted to run it as a director?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, I got better, and I think a key block. I mean, I think there is, yes, you as a crew, you just get to know each other's rhythms, and it's all about figuring out how to maximize time so that people no one's waiting for each other, right? That's the trick, and definitely a key holdup was blocking. And I think I learned how to basically run through the blocking with everyone, and then basically save questions from the actors and for afterwards, so that while they're lighting, and just managing that a little bit better. That's a pretty basic thing, but that it was something that I did have to sort of learn on the fly, that I hadn't quite mastered from the shorts and other things that I've done before. And because it really is time management is everything. You are addressing the model as she's walking down the runway, and that's what you're always up against. And we did make changes. I think we did cut a few scenes which we realized we didn't need as we were shooting. But I also, after the first week of shooting, rewrote a few scenes because of changes that I made to the script in pre-production based on the reality of what was going to be possible within our budget and the time that we had. And those changes made under duress, because the easiest thing to do is just change the script, caused issues that I really appreciated while we were shooting. We're going to be real issues in the story. And I tried to make changes to the script while we were shooting, and we did change some scenes, Uh, but it wasn't until the edit that we really were able to salvage it, because it did cause issues. And but I actually do think what we did, this was really, it was the first act. I think it's actually better than even what was originally written, because it really forced us to kind of focus in really on what's the key pieces here, and how do we ramp up the tension with each scene, and anything that didn't do that, we jettisoned.
No, and they're all very genuine challenges that every filmmaker is trying to navigate. So thank you so much for sharing all of that and taking the time to dive into all of this with the movie with us. Thank you so much, Wyatt.
Oh, thank you. This has been really fun. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.